There is possibly, you could actually extend Tony Radakin again, the current Chief of Defence Staff, particularly when you have this current war on.
Mm.
And we now know that Trump will not end the war in one day, but he's now looking at a time frame of something around 6 months. He hasn't said he'll end the war in Ukraine in 6 months. And so, from a continuity perspective, you might argue that it's a good thing to keep Tony Radakin on.
What goes on behind the heavily guarded doors of the Ministry of Defence? Well, the Times has a very well-connected defence correspondent, Larissa Brown. She's learnt that a retired general could be brought back to lead the whole armed forces. Larissa's with us in the studio. Morning, Larissa.
Morning.
So is there a problem with the contenders who aren't retired?
From what I can gather, there's just a feeling that there isn't enough people to choose from. And normally what happens is John Healey has a few people on a short list and he puts them through to Keir Starmer, and then Starmer obviously makes the decision in the end. And so there's a feeling that they need to look further than the current pool of candidates, and that's why they're taking the unusual step of considering bringing back a retired military chief. And also potentially allowing lower ranking officers to actually also put their hat in the ring.
So by retired, you mean literally has finished their service, has left the armed services entirely?
Has left entirely. Apparently that hasn't happened in at least the last 25 years. I was doing a bit of research this morning. Lord Mountbatten in the 50s had left and then returned as head of the Navy and then became Chief of the Defence Staff. So it has happened previously, but not in a very, very long time.
And normally to lead the whole armed forces, would they normally just pick a service chief of one of the three parts of the military? Is that how it normally works?
Normally it's a four-star, yes. So typically all the three heads of the services would put their name in. But then we learnt yesterday that Ben Key, who's the current First Sea Lord, doesn't want the job. Apparently he doesn't think that he's been given the resources to fix the Navy, and so he's going to be leaving in the summer, so that rules out him. Rolly Walker, the current head of the army, has only been in the job since about June, July, so he's pretty new to the role. So he might be with a chance in the future, but probably not this time round. So actually that just leaves us with the Chief of the Air Staff, Sir Richard Knighton, who potentially could get the job. He's very well respected, and people like Jim Hockenhull, who leads the Strategic Command, again another well respected figure, but they're obviously looking elsewhere. There's also been a suggestion that Gwyn Jenkins could be the front runner. He is, particularly well known because he's going to be that national security advisor for Keir Starmer, and Keir Starmer decided that he didn't want him, so he could also be in the running.
But there's a problem. Is there a problem with him, or is there a sense that he might be involved near to a problem?
His name keeps coming up because he's been questioned over the Afghan inquiry, which is into those alleged killings in Afghanistan by the SAS. And he's been asked about his role, what information he knew and what he did with it. And so actually his name does keep coming up in relation to the inquiry. So someone was saying to me yesterday that they believed that he could have been tainted by the inquiry and might be less likely to be given that job.
And just finally, we're going to talk to Chip Chapman in a minute, who's a retired Major General. But is this bad? Is this a bad look? Because we quite often have people who are connected with the military on this show saying it's very hard yards being part of the military. No one really respects you until there's a war, and even then they don't give you the money you need. There's not enough resourcing. It's a very difficult job. Is this a sign of how difficult it is?
I think it is to some extent. It is an extremely tough job, and also we're currently in a period of extreme tensions around the world. So whoever takes the job off Admiral Radakin when he leaves in the autumn is going to have a lot of challenges facing them. And of course, we've also got this ongoing strategic defence review, and ministers want somebody that's going to be able to bring in all of those major reforms, so that they're really going to have a tough challenge.
Larissa, great to speak to you. Thank you so much. That's Larissa Brown, who is the defence editor of the Times. Let's talk to Chip Chapman, retired Major General Chip Chapman. He's a former senior British military advisor. Chip, good morning to you.
Good morning, Steve.
Any chance you fancy the job?
I think I'm way past my time for that, and my ability to be the strategy bridge between political intent and military power. I went years ago when I told the practical truth, which is what people should do in the military, and you hope that whoever does become CDS will do the same thing.
Are you surprised that people aren't banging down the door to get the job? From what Larissa's saying, that seems to be the issue. There's a couple of reasons why, but it doesn't seem that many people want it.
Well, there is a difference between being a service chief and leading your force and being CDS, the Chief of Defence Staff, where, as I said, it is really that job of the strategy bridge between political intent and military power. And the reason for that is the MOD is almost unique in government departments in that it fulfills two functions. It's both a higher military headquarters, so he sets the strategy and future development and briefs the Prime Minister and the Secretary of State on military operations. But it's also a Department of State, and it's unusual in that, for example, there are no teachers in the Department of Education.
Yeah.
And he has a civil comparator, which of course is a parliamentary undersecretary, who's the guy really with the budget and does that sort of side of the civil side of it. So he has both access to the Prime Minister and access to the Secretary of State. But it is that unusual relationship. He also, and what's interesting at the time, because you mentioned, or Larissa did, the uncertainty of the international environment. One of his other key tasks is he leads the relationships and international relations with his with the other heads, the CHODS meeting, as we call it, the Chiefs of Defence Staff. And so there is possibly, you could actually extend Tony Radakin again, the current Chief of Defence Staff, particularly when you have this current war on. And we now know that Trump will not end the war in one day, but he's now looking at a time frame of something around 6 months. He hasn't said he'll end the war in Ukraine in 6 months. And so from a continuity perspective, you might argue that it's a good thing to keep Tony Radakin on.
Would you do that? Would you keep the incumbent?
I think I would actually, because Tony Radakin, who I know, he's been there all the time. He was one of the guys who went to Russia, in the weeks before the Russian invasion. So that sort of continuity and understanding. And of course, not only is he that strategy bridge, but he bridged both the Conservative government and the current Labour government. So I think he's ideally placed to understand where military strategy fits into the political intent. So I would probably try and keep him on for a bit.
Do you think that the skills that make you a very senior military figure aren't the same skills that make you a very senior political figure? So you might be good at leadership and you might be good at running your own service, but that doesn't mean you know the way around Whitehall. Do you think people sometimes can get promoted into this job who are good at being soldiers or sailors or airman or woman, but actually aren't very good at the politics?
Yeah, there's definitely a risk of that, because generally you get promoted in any of the forces by being a good commander. That is, your leadership and decision making in the field. We're there ultimately to fight wars and win them if you're an operator, but you're not a military operator of land, sea, air, cyber or space when you're at the pinnacle of the Ministry of Defence as the Chief of the Defence Staff. You are absolutely an appointee which has a political resonance all the time and every day. So there is a difference in the skill set between leading your troops and being on a par with both the PUS and the civilian government at the time who you serve. Because in a democratic state, of course, it's the politicians who are primus inter pares. And the first part of military strategy, as set by Alan Brooke, who did the function for Churchill, is the first thing is always determine the aim, which is political, and then you derive the military strategy from that.
And those two things might sometimes rub against each other uncomfortably. Chip, good to speak to you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Steve.
That's Chip Chapman there, retired Major General, former senior British military advisor, but not going to be the next General Chief of the Defence Staff.